Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're doing something kind of different this time around. We're going to be looking at the 2024 Democratic Party platform.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. So, we've got excerpts from their official document here.
Okay.
And, I think we all want to kind of get past just like the surface level headlines and really understand,
Right.
what are the Democrats focusing on this election?
The core of it.
What are their plans?
Yeah, what's the strategy?
What's the strategy behind the messaging?
Absolutely.
Right?
It's like we've got the architectural blueprints for their campaign, and we're going to see, how the structure holds up.
I love that.
Under scrutiny.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so first impression, just like off the bat, it feels like they're going all in on this idea of like two different economic visions.
Oh, yeah.
One under Trump.
Classic.
And one that they're envisioning under Biden.
It's a classic us versus them narrative.
Totally.
Absolutely. And they even, the platform even throws in Biden's
his Scranton roots.
As a way to contrast his background with, Trump's Mar-a-Lago lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's all about
relatability,
trying to connect with that average person, who might be struggling financially.
But then they go on to tout all this economic progress.
Right.
Under Biden.
Right.
Record job growth. Lowest unemployment in decades. Even climbing wages are up, especially for lower income workers.
Right.
Is that the full picture, though?
No, they're leaning very heavily on statistics here.
Okay.
Citing specific numbers to create this image of a booming economy.
Okay.
And while some of those numbers might be technically accurate,
right,
it's important to remember that context is key.
Yeah.
Economic indicators can be complex.
Yeah.
And, focusing solely on those positive data points while ignoring other factors
doesn't tell the whole story.
It's
like highlighting the wins without acknowledging the losses.
Right.
Kind of cherry-picking the data.
Precisely.
To fit the narrative.
And that selective presentation continues when they talk about Biden's Investing in America agenda.
Okay.
They point to all these infrastructure projects, clean energy investments.
Right.
Especially stemming from the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Yeah, they seem pretty proud of that.
Yeah.
Roads, bridges, internet access.
Tangible stuff.
These are things people can actually see and touch.
Exactly. It plays into this desire for tangible results.
Yeah.
But the question is, are these achievements solely due to Biden's policies?
Right.
Or were there other factors at play? And are these projects truly addressing the most pressing needs, or are some of them more about optics and creating a sense of progress, regardless of actual impact?
Interesting point. Then there's this big push for tax fairness, right? Arguing that the rich need to pay their fair share and criticizing those Trump tax cuts for corporations.
Right. This taps into this deeply resonant theme.
Totally.
The idea of fairness, of everyone contributing their part. And they even go further, claiming that Trump's policies will inevitably lead to a recession and actually raise taxes on the middle class.
Wow. That's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's one we need to examine closely.
Okay.
Is there evidence to support this assertion, or is this a tactic to evoke fear and uncertainty?
Push people to their side.
Pushing voters towards their side by painting this dire picture of the alternative. Remember, economic projections are notoriously tricky.
Yeah.
And using them to make definitive statements about the future can be misleading.
Okay. So we need to be wary of those like doomsday predictions.
Right.
But they also spend a lot of time emphasizing their efforts to lower costs for families. Healthcare, childcare, housing, even those pesky junk fees.
Yeah.
They claim progress on all those fronts.
Just smart positioning. Addressing the anxieties people feel about the rising cost of living is crucial.
Right.
And notice how they personalize it, saying these policies put thousands of dollars back in people's pockets.
Makes it feel real relatable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the question is, are those savings tangible and widespread, or are they more theoretical based on idealized scenarios?
Right.
Are they oversimplifying complex issues to make their solutions seem more effective than they might be in reality?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of questions we need to ask as we dig deeper into this platform. It's all about framing the narrative in a way that resonates with voters' concerns.
Right.
And that brings us to their staunch defense of Social Security and Medicare.
Okay.
They go all in,
Yeah.
accusing Trump and Republicans of wanting to cut these programs.
It's like they're ringing the alarm bell.
Exactly.
Wow.
Trying to scare older voters into thinking their retirement security is at stake.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. It plays to those fears,
Mhm.
creating a sense of urgency and high stakes.
Right.
But are those accusations grounded in reality?
Okay.
Have Trump and Republicans explicitly proposed cutting these programs?
Right.
Or Democrats taking their opponents' words out of context, twisting their positions to fit this narrative of an impending threat?
Right.
We need to look beyond the rhetoric
Okay.
and examine the actual proposals being put forth by both sides.
So a healthy dose of skepticism is in order.
Hmm.
Okay, shifting gears, they also make a big deal about climate change,
Right.
calling it an urgent crisis, and highlighting all of Biden's actions to promote clean energy and reduce emissions.
This is a key issue for younger voters, and they're clearly trying to appeal to that demographic.
Okay.
But it's also interesting to look at the language they use.
Okay.
They talk about Biden restoring America's global leadership on climate change.
Implying that Trump basically abandoned that leadership role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about painting themselves as the responsible party,
Yeah.
the ones taking action on this global issue. But again, we need to ask, are their claims about Trump's inaction accurate?
Okay.
Did he actively hinder progress on climate change, or is this a simplification of a complex political landscape?
It feels like they're trying to create these stark contrasts, right? Democrats are the heroes.
Yeah.
Republicans are the villains.
Absolutely.
And that carries over to their stance on gun safety as well.
Absolutely. They highlight Biden's efforts to pass gun safety legislation,
Okay.
contrasting it with what they claim is Trump's inaction
Right.
and close ties to the gun lobby.
It's a powerful message, especially in the wake of so many tragic shootings.
Right.
But is it a fair representation of the issue?
That's the key question. Are they accurately portraying
Okay.
the nuances of the debate? Are they overlooking complexities
Right.
and potential compromises
Yeah.
to present a more black and white picture? And are they focusing on the most effective solutions, or are some of their proposals more about symbolism than substance?
Okay, so we need to be cautious about accepting their framing of these issues at face value. But they also touch on a bunch of other topics.
Right.
Strengthening democracy, protecting freedoms, and advancing equity, immigration, and border security.
Yeah. It's a lot.
It's a lot to unpack. Yeah, and it's worth noting that these sections often feel more like bullet points than in-depth policy discussions. They touch on hot-button issues, abortion rights, LGBTQ+ rights, racial justice.
Right.
But the details are often lacking.
Almost like they're checking boxes, making sure they hit all the key points for their base.
Exactly. It's about signaling their stance on these issues without necessarily delving into the specifics of how they plan to address them.
Precisely.
Okay, so a bit more style than substance in those sections. But then they go back to that broader narrative, framing the election as a battle for democracy itself, with Trump as the big bad wolf threatening to blow the house down.
Right. It's a powerful appeal to patriotism and civic duty. They portray Trump as a threat to democratic norms and institutions, and Democrats as the valiant defenders of American democracy.
It's dramatic.
It is.
Yeah.
And it raises the stakes, making the choice seem more consequential.
Right.
But again, we need to ask, are they exaggerating the threat?
Okay.
Are they using this framing to deflect attention from their own potential shortcomings?
So a healthy dose of critical thinking is essential here.
Absolutely. We can't let emotionally charged language cloud our judgment.
Right.
We need to carefully examine their claims, compare them to the evidence, and consider alternative perspectives before forming our own opinions.
Got it. Now let's dive into some of their specific policy proposals, starting with their economic plan.
Right.
They talk about growing the economy from the middle out and bottom up, not the top down. What exactly does that mean?
Essentially, it's a rejection of trickle-down economics.
Okay.
The idea that tax cuts for the wealthy will eventually benefit everyone. They're advocating for policies that directly benefit working families
Okay.
and those struggling to make ends meet.
Things like raising the minimum wage, expanding access to affordable health care, investing in education and job training.
Precisely, they argue that These policies will put more money in the pockets of average Americans, stimulating demand and driving economic growth.
Okay.
It's a populist message that aims to resonate with those who feel left behind by the current economic system.
They also boast about the economic recovery under Biden, even going so far as to call it the strongest economic recovery in the world.
Right.
They throw out a bunch of statistics to support that, claim record job growth, low unemployment, rising wages. Are those numbers telling the whole story, though?
That's where things get a bit tricky.
Okay.
While some of those figures might be accurate in isolation,
Right.
it's important to look at the broader context.
Right.
For example, they highlight job growth, but what kind of jobs are being created? Are they good-paying, sustainable jobs, or are they mostly low-wage service sector positions?
So the quality of the jobs matters just as much as the quantity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they also gloss over potential negative impacts of their policies. For instance, they tout rising wages, but fail to mention that inflation has also been rising,
Right.
eroding those wage gains for many families.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag then.
Right.
Not quite the rosy picture they're painting.
Right. They're cherry-picking positive data points while downplaying or ignoring potential downsides.
Okay.
It's about crafting a narrative that emphasizes their successes while deflecting from potential criticisms.
Okay, so we need to read between the lines a bit. Now let's talk about their focus on small businesses.
Okay.
They claim that Democrats are the party of small businesses and that Trump's policies actually hurt them.
Right.
What's their evidence for that?
They point to the American Rescue Plan, which provided aid to small businesses during the pandemic. They argue that it was crucial in preventing widespread closures and keeping people employed.
Okay.
And they criticized Trump's tax cuts, claiming they disproportionately benefited large corporations, leaving small businesses behind.
But isn't it true that many small businesses also benefited from those tax cuts?
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
And it's one they conveniently gloss over.
Okay.
They focus solely on the negative aspects, creating a narrative that portrays Republicans as hostile to small businesses, even though the reality is more nuanced.
So again, it's about shaping the narrative to fit their agenda.
Exactly. And that pattern continues when we look at their emphasis on good jobs.
Okay.
Not just any jobs, but jobs that pay a living wage and offer benefits. They talk about investing in infrastructure, manufacturing, and clean energy, arguing that these sectors will create high-paying jobs that can't be outsourced.
It sounds appealing, but is it realistic?
That's the million-dollar question. While those investments might create some good jobs, it's unlikely to be enough to significantly shift the overall job market.
Right.
And they failed to address the potential downsides of these policies, such as the increased costs for businesses and consumers associated with transitioning to clean energy.
Okay, so their solutions might be more complex and potentially less effective than they're letting on.
Right.
What about their stance on poverty?
Okay.
They claim that the American Rescue Plan significantly reduced poverty and criticize Republicans for opposing it.
They specifically highlight the expansion of the child tax credit, arguing that it lifted millions of children out of poverty. And while there's evidence to support that claim, it's important to note that the expansion was temporary, and poverty rates have since risen again.
So they're taking credit for a temporary fix without acknowledging the long-term challenges.
Exactly. It's about highlighting a perceived win, even if it wasn't a sustainable solution. And they also fail to address the potential downsides of their approach, such as the impact of increased government spending on inflation.
Okay, so we need to be wary of those short-term fixes being presented as long-term solutions. Now let's talk about their stance on taxes. Always a hot-button issue. They're really hammering on the idea of tax fairness, claiming that the wealthy aren't paying their fair share. What are some of their specific proposals?
They propose closing loopholes that benefit the wealthy, raising taxes on corporations, and ensuring that millionaires and billionaires pay a higher tax rate. They criticize Trump's tax cuts, arguing that they blew up the deficit and primarily benefited the wealthiest Americans.
But didn't those tax cuts also lead to economic growth, at least in the short term?
That's the debate, right? They focus solely on the negative aspects, such as the increased deficit, while ignoring potential positive outcomes, such as job creation and investment. It's about framing the issue in a way that supports their narrative
Right.
of the wealthy not paying their fair share.
So once again, it's about choosing which facts to highlight and which to downplay.
Precisely. And that brings us to their claim that lowering costs for families is their #1 economic priority.
Okay.
They list a whole bunch of areas
Mm-hmm.
where they're supposedly making progress.
Okay.
Healthcare prescription drugs,
Yeah.
childcare, home care, leave housing, education, even groceries.
It sounds impressive.
Yeah,
But are they actually delivering on those promises?
that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
While they point to specific policies like capping insulin costs
Right.
and negotiating drug prices for Medicare,
Hmm.
they often gloss over the complexities
Right.
and potential unintended consequences.
Okay.
For instance, capping insulin costs might benefit some patients in the short term,
Mm-hmm.
but it could also discourage innovation and lead to higher drug prices in the long run.
So their solutions might not be as simple or as effective as they're making them sound.
Exactly. We need to look beyond the talking points
Right.
and carefully examine the details of their proposals,
Mm-hmm.
considering both the potential benefits and the potential drawbacks.
Okay, so a healthy dose of skepticism is warranted.
Right.
Now, they dedicate a lot of space to healthcare,
Okay.
specifically defending the Affordable Care Act.
Mm-hmm.
They highlight the fact that more Americans have health insurance than ever before
Right.
and claim that Republican proposals would strip millions of people of coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an accurate portrayal of the situation?
It's a simplification for sure.
Okay.
While the ACA did expand coverage to millions of Americans,
Mhm.
it also faced significant challenges,
Okay.
such as rising premiums and limited choice in some markets.
Right.
And while some Republicans have proposed repealing the ACA,
Oh.
others have put forth alternative plans
Mm-hmm.
that aim to address its shortcomings while maintaining coverage for those who gained it under the law.
So it's not as black and white as they're making it seem.
Exactly. They're framing it as a battle between those who support healthcare for all
Right.
and those who want to take it away, which is a distortion
Mhm.
of the complex realities of healthcare policy.
Okay, so we need to be wary of that oversimplification.
Right.
Now, they're equally passionate when it comes to defending Social Security and Medicare,
Yeah.
accusing Trump and Republicans of wanting to cut these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Are those accusations fair?
It depends on how you define cut.
Oh.
While some Republicans have proposed changes to these programs,
Right.
such as raising the retirement age or means testing benefits,
Okay.
they argue that these are necessary reforms to ensure their long-term solvency.
Mhm.
Democrats, on the other hand, frame any changes as cuts
Right.
and portray themselves as the staunch defenders of these programs.
So it's a matter of perspective and framing.
Exactly. They're using emotionally charged language to create a sense of fear and urgency, hoping to mobilize older voters who rely on these programs.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that there were legitimate concerns about the long-term sustainability of these programs.
Right.
And simply dismissing any proposed changes as cuts doesn't address those concerns.
Okay, so we need to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the actual proposals being put forth.
Right.
Now let's shift gears to climate change.
Okay.
They frame it as an existential threat
Mm-hmm.
and highlight Biden's actions to address it, contrasting them with what they claim is Trump's inaction and even denial of the issue.
Right.
Is that a fair assessment?
Well, it's true that Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement and rolled back some environmental regulations.
Okay.
However, it's also worth noting that he signed an executive order promoting tree planting and that his administration continued to invest in clean energy technologies.
Okay.
So while his approach might have differed from Biden's,
Right.
to say he completely ignored the issue is a bit of a stretch.
So again, they're creating a sharper contrast than might actually exist.
Exactly. It's about highlighting their own commitment to climate action while painting their opponents as obstructionists, even if the reality is more nuanced.
Okay, so we need to be careful about accepting their framing of the issue at face value.
Right.
Now let's talk about their stance on gun safety.
Okay.
They highlight Biden's efforts to pass gun safety legislation, contrasting it with what they claim is Trump's close relationship with the gun lobby
Mm-hmm.
and his unwillingness to take action on the issue.
Right.
Is that a fair representation?
Well, it's true that Biden has made gun safety a priority.
Okay.
and has pushed for stricter gun control measures. And Trump did enjoy strong support from the NRA.
Why?
However, it's also worth noting that Trump signed a bill banning bump stocks.
Okay.
And that his administration implemented a rule clarifying the definition of fugitive from justice to prevent certain individuals from purchasing firearms. So while he might not have supported the same measures as Biden, to say he did nothing on gun safety is misleading.
So once again, they're creating a more stark contrast than might actually exist in reality.
Exactly. They're framing it as a battle between those who want to take action to prevent gun violence and those who are beholden to the gun lobby, which is a simplification of a complex and emotionally charged issue.
Okay, so we need to be wary of those oversimplifications and look at the issue from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. And that brings us to their framing of the election as a battle for democracy itself, portraying Trump as a threat to democratic norms and institutions.
It's a pretty dramatic claim.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's designed to evoke a sense of urgency and fear, motivating voters to see this election as a choice between preserving democracy or succumbing to authoritarianism.
But is it an accurate portrayal of the situation?
That's a matter of debate. While Trump has certainly challenged some democratic norms and institutions, it's also worth noting that he peacefully transferred power after losing the 2020 election.
So it's not as clear-cut as they're making it seem.
Exactly. They're framing it as a battle between good and evil.
Yeah.
Democracy versus tyranny, which is a simplification of a complex political landscape.
Okay, so we need to be careful not to get swept up in that rhetoric. Now, they also touch on a wide range of social issues, from reproductive rights to LGBTQ plus rights to racial justice. But these sections often feel more like bullet points than in-depth policy discussions.
That's because they're primarily focused on signaling their stance on these issues, appealing to their base and specific constituencies. They highlight their commitment to these causes, but don't necessarily delve into the specifics of how they plan to address them.
So more about symbolism than substance in these sections.
To some extent, yes. It's about appealing to voters who care about these issues, without necessarily committing to specific policy proposals.
Okay, so we need to read between the lines and not assume that their brief mentions of these issues translate to concrete action plans.
Right. It's important to remember that political platforms are often aspirational documents, outlining broad goals and values rather than detailed policy blueprints.
Okay, and let's talk about immigration, always a hot-button issue.
Okay.
They lay out Biden's approach, which they say focuses on both border security and humane treatment of migrants. But as we've discussed, that's a tricky balance to strike.
Absolutely. They talk about securing the border while also expanding legal pathways to immigration and supporting a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. But these goals can often be in conflict, and it's unclear how they plan to reconcile them in practice.
So they might be oversimplifying the issue to make their approach sound more feasible than it actually is.
Possibly they're presenting a vision of a balanced and humane immigration system, but the details of how they plan to achieve that remain vague.
Okay, so we need to press for those details and not accept their broad statements at face value.
Exactly. And that brings us to their final section.
Okay.
Where they highlight Biden's foreign policy agenda. They portray him as restoring America's global leadership after what they suggest was a period of isolationism under Trump.
It's a narrative we've heard before.
Yes, it's a common theme in their messaging. They emphasize Biden's efforts to rebuild alliances, engage in diplomacy, and address global challenges like climate change and pandemics.
But they also downplay or ignore areas where his foreign policy has faced criticism, right?
Absolutely. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan is one example. They present a selective view of his foreign policy record, highlighting the positive aspects while downplaying or ignoring the negative ones.
So cherry-picking the positive aspects while downplaying the negative ones once again.
Exactly. They're presenting a narrative of Biden as a competent and experienced leader on the world stage, contrasting him with what they portray as Trump's erratic and unpredictable approach. But as always, the reality is more complex than their black and white portrayal.
Okay, so we need to be wary of those simplistic narratives and look at the issue from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. It's about being informed, not just persuaded. We need to critically examine the evidence weigh the arguments, and make up our own minds.
Yes, well said. So there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the 2024 Democratic Party platform.
Right.
We've explored their vision for America, their policy proposals, and their strategies for appealing to voters. But as we've seen, it's important to read between the lines.
Right.
Question their claims and consider alternative perspectives before forming our own opinions.
Absolutely.
It's about being informed, not just persuaded.
Exactly. Political platforms are carefully crafted documents designed to persuade, not just inform.
Right.
It's up to each of us to be critical thinkers, to engage with the issues, and to make informed decisions based on evidence, not just rhetoric.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Until next time.
Okay, so education.
Yeah.
They talk a lot about making college more affordable and accessible.
Right. This is a key issue for younger voters and their families. They highlight Biden's proposals for tuition-free community college and increased Pell Grant funding.
Okay.
They also criticize the rising cost of college and the burden of student loan debt.
But are their proposals enough to truly address those issues? Free community college sounds great.
Yeah.
But what about the cost of four-year universities?
That's a valid point. Their focus on community college is a more achievable goal in the short term, but it doesn't address the larger systemic issues,
Right.
driving up the cost of higher education across the board.
So it's a partial solution, not a comprehensive one.
Exactly. And they also gloss over potential downsides of their proposals. For instance, increasing Pell Grant funding without addressing the underlying cost of college could simply lead to higher tuition prices, benefiting universities more than students.
So it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Precisely. They're addressing the symptoms without necessarily tackling the root causes.
Now let's move on to their section on strengthening democracy. They portray this election as a battle for democracy itself, with Trump as the big bad wolf threatening to blow the house down.
Yeah.
But we've talked about how that framing might be a bit overblown, right?
Yes, it's a powerful narrative, but it's important to remember that Trump peacefully transferred power after losing the 2020 election. And while he certainly challenged some democratic norms, to portray him as an existential threat to democracy is a bit hyperbolic.
So they're playing up the drama to motivate their base.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that they also use this section to highlight their own efforts to protect voting rights, combat disinformation, and support democratic movements around the world. It's a way of positioning themselves as the champions of democracy, both at home and abroad.
But are they really walking the walk, or is it mostly talk?
That's a question for voters to decide. They highlight specific policies and actions, but it's up to each individual to evaluate whether those efforts are sufficient or whether more needs to be done.
Okay, so we need to look beyond the rhetoric and examine their track record.
Absolutely. And that brings us to their section on social issues. They touch on a wide range of topics: abortion rights, LGBTQ+ rights, racial justice. But as we've discussed, these sections are often more about signaling their stance than outlining concrete policy proposals.
It's like they're checking boxes, making sure they hit all the key points for their base.
Exactly. They're appealing to specific constituencies and demonstrating their commitment to these causes. But the details of how they plan to address these issues are often lacking.
So we need to read between the lines and not assume that their brief mentions translate to concrete action plans.
Right. It's important to remember that political platforms are often aspirational documents outlining broad goals and values rather than detailed policy blueprints.
Okay, now let's talk about immigration. Always a hot-button issue. They lay out Biden's approach, which they say focuses on both border security and humane treatment of migrants. But as we've discussed, that's a tricky balance to strike.
Absolutely. They talk about securing the border while also expanding legal pathways to immigration and supporting a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. But these goals can often be in conflict, and it's unclear how they plan to reconcile them in practice.
So they might be oversimplifying the issue to make their approach sound more feasible than it actually is.
Possibly. They're presenting a vision of a balanced and humane immigration system, but the details of how they plan to achieve that remain vague.
Okay, so we need to press for those details and not accept their broad statements at face value.
Exactly, and that brings us to their final section where they highlight Biden's foreign policy agenda. They portray him as restoring America's global leadership after what they suggest was a period of isolationism under Trump.
That's a narrative we've heard before.
Yes, it's a common theme in their messaging. They emphasize Biden's efforts to rebuild alliances, engage in diplomacy, and address global challenges like climate change and pandemics.
But they also downplay or ignore areas where his foreign policy has faced criticism.
Absolutely. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan is one example. They present a selective view of his foreign policy record, highlighting the positive aspects while downplaying or ignoring the negative ones.
So once again, it's about shaping the narrative to fit their agenda.
Exactly. They're presenting a vision of Biden as a competent and experienced leader on the world stage, contrasting him with what they portray as Trump's erratic and unpredictable approach. But as always, the reality is more nuanced than their black and white portrayal.
Okay, so we need to be wary of those simplistic narratives and look at the issue from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely. It's about being informed, not just persuaded. We need to critically examine the evidence, weigh the arguments, and make up our own minds.
Well said. So there you have it, folks, a deep dive into the 2024 Democratic Party platform. We've explored their vision for America, their policy proposals, and their strategies for appealing to voters. But as we've seen, it's important to read between the lines, question their claims, and consider alternative perspectives before forming our own opinions.
Exactly. Political platforms are carefully crafted documents designed to persuade, not just inform. It's up to each of us to be critical thinkers, to engage with the issues, and to make informed decisions based on evidence, not just rhetoric.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
Until next time.